Welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Stanley. I'm the Associate Director and Curator of History at the Museum of Sonoma County, and welcome to today's program. And really quickly, as we continue to bring our community free online public programs during this challenging time, please consider becoming a member or renewing your membership to the museum. I know we have a number of members here today. Thank you very much. Or making a contribution to support the Museum of Sonoma County in our efforts. So thank you for your support. In order to do that, you can text program to 91999 or go to museumsc/donate if you're willing to do that. So tonight's program is about focusing on what may be the museum's greatest artifact, the 1910 Santa Rosa Post Office building. Now, while the building is actually owned by the city of Santa Rosa, it has served as the home of the Museum of Sonoma County since its opening in 1985. And while we've expanded and added on to the museum since then, the post office, its history, and really the spirit of this building and what it was is deeply woven into the fabric of what we do. So maybe it's fitting at this time when we can't really physically gather together in this old building that we take a little extra time to appreciate it and think about its significance, maybe from a little bit different or broader perspective. And here tonight, we have a special guest to help us do just that. But before I introduce her, I'd like to set the stage just a bit in two different ways. First off, I'd like to thank Smithsonian affiliates. The Museum of Sonoma County has been an affiliate since 2009, and we are always pleased and honored to find opportunities to work with affiliates, and they are always willing to partner with us to coordinate programs such as this. So to the crew at affiliates, thank you very much. And we'd also like to thank the Smithsonian National Postal Museum for providing our special presenter tonight and helping us to tell the story of the significance of our building from a more national perspective. It's such a great thing to have that connection to the Smithsonian. And for the second way in which I'd like to set the table here is to tell you briefly the way in which we usually tell the story of the old post office here, because what is missing forms some of the basis for tonight's program. So in order to do that, I'm gonna share some images here. So I'm gonna share my screen. Oops. Oh, let's go rewind. We'll start at the beginning. How about that? So this is our building as it looks now. And when we tell the story of our building, the old post office, you know, we might tell you things, for instance, like about the way the building looks and the architecture. You'll notice that our building has like red terracotta tile on the roof. And so one of the things we talk about is the fact that the architecture is unusual because it's the classic federal style, except with some California regional touches, and that a lot of the other buildings, there aren't many like it left anymore that have this sort of blend of California and classic federal style. So that might be something that we tell you about. And we are most certainly going to tell you very briefly about this building, which was the building that housed the post office prior to the 1910 Santa Rosa Post Office that we're now in. And we'll most definitely tell you about how that building fell into a pile of rubble in the 1906 earthquake. And from there, of course, we might tell you about the construction of the building and about some of the local people involved in building it, like Hoyt Brothers Contracting of Santa Rosa. So we'll definitely talk to you a little bit about how the building was built. And we might even tell you a little bit about some of the postmasters and other people that were associated with the building. The very first postmaster to serve in our post office was H.L. Tripp, who's in the back row there under my pointer. And we probably will bother to tell you how he was a haberdasher and sold clothing downstairs, because we happen to have a nice top hat in our collection that has his label in it. And then we might tell you about this guy, Fred Wiseman, who who made a very special delivery of mail, but was not himself an official postal employee. Will be more about him a little bit later, I think. And then we definitely tell you about yet another earthquake, the 1969 earthquake that hit Santa Rosa, that caused a lot of damage to the downtown and kicked off a whole round of urban renewal in which they were tearing down lots and lots of old buildings. And then we're certain to tell you about these wonderful folks who were people who rose up to save the building, the old post office, before it was demolished to make way for the mall that's across the street. And we'll definitely tell you about the Herculean task of dragging this building across 2 city blocks to save it from demolition and its restoration to turn it into a museum. A move that was supposed to take 7 or 8 days and ended up taking 79 days. Still a source of jokes here and there about people coming to watch the building move. And we'll tell you about opening day, you know, when we cut the ribbon and the museum opened in 1985, and the grand opening of the building and the beginning of its new life, you know, as a museum. And that's the way we tend to tell the story of the building. But the one thing that we tend not to talk much about is actually the function of the post office, or what it meant to have a post office. And so here's a behind the scenes shot. And so, yeah, what we don't talk about is what made that post office important, especially earlier in the 20th century. I mean, think of all the letters and the communication and the business and the commerce and the families and soldiers being written to and loved ones. And so all of that, and how that fit into the national scope of what it meant to have a post office. And with that background, I would like to bring on our main presenter tonight to talk a little bit about the history of the US Postal Service and how our building fits into that. Allison Basilenski is an assistant curator at the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum. An American cultural historian, she has her PhD in American Studies from William and Mary, where her research examined how fabric and clothing articulate consumer identity, gender, and culture in the early 20th century. And since joining the National Postal Museum, her interests include the history of mail order, commerce, and consumption, rural free delivery, and postal uniforms, which I think is fabulous. So with that, I'd like to welcome Allison Basilenski. Allison, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that introduction, Eric. I'm very excited to be here tonight and to talk a little bit more about the history of the post office and its role in your specific community. So I'm going to share my screen, pull up my PowerPoint. Okay. So as Eric mentioned, I work at the National Postal Museum, so we're not open right now, but if you are in Washington, D.C. in the future, we're not on the National Mall. We're actually near the train station. So please stop by when we are eventually open, probably this fall. And as a quick disclaimer, I actually started working about a year ago at the museum, and I have never been in our building, which also hosts, is home to a post office within the space as well. So hopefully someday I'll get to go in and actually see our museum. But today I want to talk about the post office and community and the vital role that the Postal Service and post office played in communities, particularly in rural or smaller growing communities, where they connected residents to local, national, and international news and issues. And I'm personally interested in this topic because I think postal history is a great way to get at the history of the everyday, and it opens up new stories and new questions. So hopefully you come away from this talk with something new and something interesting. So for this, I'm going to start at the national scale and pretty quickly work my way down to Sonoma County and Santa Rosa, but providing some context as well. So to start off, starting in the 19th century, I'm going to skip a little bit over some of the early history. But in the early 1800s, the first half of the 19th century, we're seeing movement from the eastern coast, where the mail service was fairly well established at this point, and people are starting to push westward, further into Native American lands and into territories. So as people are moving this way, the post is moving with them. And it's actually around the same time that we start to see some postal reforms, which are first sparked off in Great Britain and then taken up fairly quickly afterwards by the United States. So prior to 1845, even in remote areas, people expected to receive their mail, particularly newspapers and news about politics. Letters were actually quite expensive. The price of letters was determined by the distance they were traveling and the number of sheets of paper. So most people didn't send letters, and this is where the postal reforms that begin in 1845 and go into the 1860s start to change that and actually make mail more accessible. So while previously newspapers were subsidized, some of the policies put into place cut out the distance stipulations. Well, first they extend distance stipulations, then they cut them out. So the cost of letters dropped, and also the cost of paper is dropping as well. So 1840s, we're seeing this change in how things are charged. We see the introduction of stamps and the prepayment of mail. So previously, the person who received mail would pay the deliverer. And then in the 1850s, this shifts. First, they're optional, and then stamps eventually become required. And then there's first, second, and third class mail. Different tiers are established. So there are still discounted rates for newspapers, periodicals, different categories relating to commerce and business. And all of which end up helping companies that sell things by mail. And I'm going to come back to this later in the talk. But all of this is a background as we're thinking about when California is settled and when the West is settled. And you can see here on my PowerPoint that the first US mail to California travels by steamship in 1848. The same year that gold is discovered in California. So these early trips would have been by steamer. So you're going down the coast, you're going through the Panama Canal and up the western coast. So this would take 25 days, give or take, approximately. Obviously, a lot depends on what else is happening, whether there could be all kinds of problems. But that is the way mail was traveling 1848. And as people are moving further west for a number of reasons, the post office and Congress are also trying to make the movement of mail easier as well. So moving mail west, we have, as we're thinking about the 1840s and 1850s, there are railroads in the east, and there's starting to become some in the west. But for a lot of this land, we don't have railroads. So Congress, who is interested in moving more people out west and incentivizing people to move out west, also provides financial incentives for overland stagecoach routes to deliver the mail. So this is I pulled up this one example from our collections, the Butterfield Overland Mail Company. You can see the route this way. This is how mail would have been delivered, and it still would have been fairly treacherous, fairly difficult. You might get your mail, but like something could happen to the stage. You could be robbed. It was still not necessarily the fastest or easiest way. They did look for routes that would ensure the mail would be carried to end in 25 days or less. So we're still thinking, maybe about a month along those lines. However, by the 1860s, trains are starting to become the main way that mail is delivered. And this is also important for California. So the first US railway post office route is established in 1864. And then the Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869. And this is expanding out into territories all throughout the West. And this is significant because it speeds up the transmission of mail. So it's speeding up communication. And for those living in California, this is significant because the centers of commerce and power are still, generally speaking, on the East Coast in this mid-19th century period. So for business, thinking about capital, merchants, bankers, and then just ordinary people who probably left family in other parts of the country. People are moving further away from their families. Mail is key to all of this communication. And particularly in a region that is so defined by vast spaces and overcoming distance. The postal system is really vital to the development of the West, particularly through the railroad. And most of these areas continue to still be fairly rural. Again, mail is their connecting point. So that brings us to the post office as a community space. And I wanted to show a sample post office in Seaview from 1899, where you can see the Stanley sitting on the steps here. So I thought this quote really nicely exemplified what I mean by this. Postal offices were community hubs, even though they were rarely large physical spaces, and particularly in more rural areas, in smaller towns, they very often did not have a single building dedicated to the purpose. So it was really more than a place where you just went to pick up your mail. And this is also because outside of cities, you would not have had home mail delivery. The mail delivery in cities, order mail delivery in cities begins the mid-19th century, but there is no home delivery for rural areas until initially 1896, when rural free delivery is started. And even that, you wouldn't necessarily have that because you had to apply, towns had to apply for these routes. So rural free delivery spreads throughout the country, but it isn't necessarily even. So it depends on where you live, and there's politics involved. So most likely you were still going to the post office to pick up your mail. And again, a lot of that is dependent on the train, particularly in California. So I pulled these two articles to illustrate this from the Press Democrat from 1878. The Post Office Register, you can see the times that the mail is delivered, and it's the different routes, and as well as money order and registered business. Noting that mail and passenger trains. So mail is as significant as the movement of people in a lot of ways. And you might want to know, or you might need to know the time the mail is delivered if you're waiting for an urgent message, if it relates to business, anything along those lines. And the other article I have to illustrate is this letter list. And this popped up again and again. So we know that in Santa Rosa, people were still coming to the post office to pick up their letters because they're posted, the uncalled ones are posted. So we actually have the names of people who were getting mail, which could be a very interesting study in another way. I could think of really interesting things to do with this. And another note is they separated out foreign, and I'm not sure if they mean foreign mail or if the people receiving it, I'm assuming foreign mail, but that's just an interesting aspect to this article as well. A lot of post office were set up along the train tracks. And I even found advertisements for mining towns, and one of the things that they would put in the ad to try to get people to come was that there's a post office. So this is really a point of interest for people. The other aspect of post office was that they were often a local gathering spot. And I have this great picture that's labeled from the Sonoma County Library, group of men sitting on post office stairs. That was the name that came with this. So you can see maybe some are reading or smoking, maybe they're catching up, discussing weather, politics, and you can see post office sign here, but you can see the close proximity to other stores as well. And this is even better illustrated with the Glen Allen Pioneer Saloon and Post Office, where you have the saloon here, the post office here. So it's really very much a social space, as illustrated with both of these. And to bring this to Santa Rosa, I went through and looked at these fire insurance maps. And I think this is my favorite. In 1885, the post office, which is just labeled PO, is in the same space as a dance hall and a candy store. And I couldn't quite read what this says, but it's in a part of a building with multi-use. And I know it's hard to see because I didn't label it well, but it's right here. It's on 4th Street, and the railroad is here. So it's 4 blocks from the railroad. It's quite close. And while it does move down a little bit within these blocks here, it doesn't ever really get too far. And just quickly show 1893, it's not really it moves up a little bit, about a block on 4th Street, not too much shared space, but then in 1904, and where it stays until the 1906 earthquake, you can see banquet hall, that's maybe a grocer's here. So it's continually, every few years, it's moving down 4th Street to different locations. So it wasn't necessarily a permanent spot, which is sort of interesting, but also people seem to know where it is very consistently in the way that it's advertised in the newspaper, and it's used as a reference point. So the other point I wanted to make about post offices as public spaces, they were public in a way that other areas in the community might not be. While in cities, you might see, they might have the space to section off areas for different ethnicities. There's the Chinese Exclusion Act, and obviously a lot of prejudice around this time period as well. Or some places had sections for women, some for men. With smaller communities, and Santa Rosa is a growing town at the time, they didn't have the space necessarily to separate out everyone. So post offices were a place where different genders, races, and classes would have to pick up their mail and interact in a way that you might not see in another space. And I wanted to use the example of the Occidental Post Office as sort of this archetypal town with everything that I've been talking about. So as a community, Occidental reflected geographical patterns associated with settlement and growth that are spurred on by railroad transportation. So the railroad is constructed, and that's initially what brings laborers to that region, and then provides transportation of goods from the region to the San Francisco Bay Area. It's created in 1876, around this time period. And you can see it's certainly social in this picture. We have a couple of women who look like they're enjoying themselves from 1910. And then it provided, sometimes small post office, you might get opportunities that you wouldn't get other places. So as I was looking through these images, I discovered that Louise Morelli, at age 19, was made postmaster of the Occidental Post Office. And this made her one of the youngest postmistresses in the state. And this is despite being expelled from high school. I read in one book that her and her sister were expelled for not snitching on their friends, who I think they said had been drinking illegally. But she is still made postmaster, and I'm not really sure if I should use postmaster or postmistress, but either way, she's in charge of the post office. I'm not exactly sure how that came about, but I'm really interested in learning more. Unfortunately, the post office burns down in Occidental in that same year, 1924. It's rebuilt, but it also, like the Santa Rosa Post Office, it moves around. For a while, it's located in a general store, in a garage, and several other locations. So really in this post office, in this town, we see a lot of these trends playing out in real time. So moving back to Sonoma County and Santa Rosa, as I was saying before, the post office moves a little bit, and I tried to illustrate this map. As the town gets bigger, it actually moves further away from the railroad. So it hops further and further down where it stays. And as the population's growing, there's going to be a greater demand for consumption and products. So it's becoming more central. It's probably getting more business. And then we have the 1906 earthquake, which picture Eric showed you earlier. Then we get the current building. There's a lot of, it seems like there's a lot of local pride. The Press Democrat had several pieces over the years. This one from 1909, I know this is a bit hard to read, but Santa Rosa's attractive new post office and federal building, and they provide a really detailed write-up of everything about the building. So, you know, what is going to be there, the architecture, and then a few years later after it's built, they do note that for a town of its size, Santa Rosa is unusually well equipped in the matter of public buildings, a fact quickly noted by its visitors. The fact that they have this dedicated building, and it is in this federal style, but with California aspects, is notable. It's not usual with other places in the area, but even just reading this, you can see the local pride that is surrounding this building. And to highlight this a little bit more, I pulled some headlines that I thought really showcased the local interest in the post office, and it does keep coming up. So post office receipts show the growth of Santa Rosa, and then using the mail to track the growth of the city. And with the post office receipts, what they do is they looked at the business that was coming through and showing how it's growing. Even with the earthquake, they noted that every year it was growing. This is also to the point that post office often acted as de facto banks for communities through money orders, which first issued in 1864. And it was a way to send funds securely through the mail. So people didn't necessarily trust banks, but you could go to the post office and with a nominal fee, you could safely send money. So it's a way to access broader consumer economies, particularly as things are being sold more and more through the mail. And then we see post office news. So in 1915, they're still posting in the newspaper, looking for people who need to pick up letters without addresses. So you can, I would use this to argue that you can tell people are still interested in the post office and they're thinking about it, and the newspaper recognizes this, and they know that it's a way to get to citizens and try to figure out who hasn't gotten their mail or what hasn't been delivered. And then maybe my favorite one is the old post office, the chicken house. And the story behind this is that the frame building that had stood for 51 years on the corner of 5th and Mendocino was moved and turned into a chicken house. Over the course of its life, it served a number of different purposes, as I've been saying with the post office. So at one point it was a private school, a feed mill, an office building, and then this was the temporary post office after the 1906 earthquake, before the new one was built. So it started a new life as a chicken coop. And I want to wrap up this talk by talking about some new technologies and developments and that relate to objects at both the National Postal Museum, the Smithsonian, and the Museum of Sonoma County. So I'll take us back to Fred Wiseman and his flight from Petaluma to Santa Rosa. And so this plane hangs in the atrium of our museum. This is an older picture that I found, and we have it on loan from the National Air and Space Museum. And it was the first plane to carry mail on behalf of a postmaster. So the postmaster of Petaluma authorized the flight and provided him with some mail addressed to officials in Santa Rosa, including the local postmaster, Hiram L. Tripp. Wiseman was carrying letters from the mayor and other town leaders, some groceries, and copies of the Press Democrat, which apparently at various points in time he threw out of his plane to people on the ground to deliver. And what was interesting is the letters that were sent from the officials were actually later published in the Press Democrat so that people could read them and get an idea of what was being sent. So hundreds of people came out to watch his flight. And at one point, a wire actually got caught in his propeller and he had to come down, but he did make it to a cheering crowd and delivered the mail. So an interesting connection between my museum and yours. And then finally, I'm going to go back to mail order and seed catalogs because Luther Burbank obviously lived in Santa Rosa. And he was a prolific horticulturist. And I have here some of his beautiful covers for his seed catalogs. So when we're thinking about seed catalogs and Luther Burbank, a lot of you are probably familiar with Montgomery Ward and Sears Roebuck, who are generally credited as helping to spread mail order. The reason that one of the reasons this is possible and mail order becomes possible is in part due to those reforms I was talking about in the 1840s and 60s that helped make these eventual large catalogs possible by lowering costs of delivery and establishing more discounted rates. The other postal policies that helped were rural free delivery, as I had talked about before, and then parcel post is established in 1913. Previously, it would have been express companies, so it wasn't necessarily the U.S. Postal Department. But after 1913, parcel deliveries can be made through the U.S. Post. So all of these policies help expand consumer culture and goods and not services so much, but goods certainly, from cities into the country, which helps shift expectations as well. So seed houses were growing rapidly in the mid 1800s to late 1800s, and they often relied heavily on their catalogs and advertising through their catalogs. So Burbank is part of this mail order movement, and seed companies are all part of this movement. So you can see here, no agents, all business done at Santa Rosa. And I know that the 1924 catalog claimed they had 65,000 customers worldwide, which isn't too bad. Interestingly, Burbank was a cousin of W. Atlee Burpee of Burpee Seed Company, and they became the world's largest mail order seed business during the 1900s with their catalog. Another way that companies would advertise their seeds was through these trade cards, and they made their debut in 1876 at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. And these are from an online exhibit with the Smithsonian. We have a Burpee one here, and these two are from Trenton, New Jersey. And I can't remember where this one is from, but I wanted to show you these so you get an idea of some of the ways they thought they could appeal to consumers through these illustrations. I think these are great. Also, Burbank was not the only seed company in Santa Rosa, and people were clearly interested in seed catalogs more broadly. I wanted to highlight these 2 points, these two newspaper articles. This first one from 1920, Welcome Seed Catalogs. The mails are now carrying hope and cheer to many homes in the land. Budget worries and high prices, the shortage of everything necessary are all forgotten in the arrival of the seed catalog. So I would argue this demonstrates that they are certainly popular in the area, and they're coming through the post office. And then this from 1921, we have someone else in town, Isaac F. Tillinghast issued his 1921 catalog of new creations in fruits, vegetables, grains, and flowers, containing many novelties and specialties of unusual merit. And this catalog was actually issued from the Press Democrat printery, and he was operating from a post office box. So it's a movement that's happening across the United States. You're seeing people coming together and connecting through mail order catalogs. Santa Rosa is very much a part of this, and the post office is also very much a part of this. And I want to end on this cartoon that addresses seed catalogs and their role in Santa Rosa, which is sort of mocking how excited people are. So down here, I know this might be hard to read on your computer, but the bottom says, Station Agent Dad Keys has rigged up a great labor-saving arrangement for hauling the spring crop of seed catalogs to the post office. One trip is now equal to 3 trips under the old system. And we've got people running down, running toward him, trying to get the seed catalogs. You can see a man on his horse. And then we've got this guy over here, sort of mocking everyone, saying if the loafers in this town would spend as much time in their gardens as they do looking at the pictures in those seed books, they'd be a credit to the town. And I thought this was really interesting because it also speaks to the apocryphal tales you hear about people using reading Sears Roebuck more than the Bible, or using it to learn how to read, and just the significance of Sears. And it seems like at least seed catalogs possibly played rather a similar cultural role or social significance. And I would love to learn more about that, but I will end with this, and I'm happy to take any questions. Stop sharing my screen.
Well, thank you, Allison. That was great. I learned quite a bit. In fact, we have one question that's already up, and it was incredibly well timed because it was right before your slides of Burbank there, which asked if we found any evidence that Luther Burbank played a role in justification for building a bigger post office. I mean, that's probably a tough question to answer, but like you're saying, the expansion of kind of commerce through the mail at the time and all of that. So, do you have a comment on that, or?
I wonder. I didn't find anything. I certainly found him mentioned often as being important in the town, in the role he played. But I wonder if there would maybe be something in town archives or records if there's anything relating to meetings about the post office.
Yeah.
So I can't really answer the question, but I wouldn't rule it out.
Right, and the only thing that I know is that, like, I think I'd mentioned that to you beforehand, that we'd seen one picture, because there aren't many great interior photos of the post office when it's in operation, which is probably a typical thing, right? They didn't photograph it a lot, but one that I did find was in the Press Democrat, I think in the 20s, that was essentially saying, this was the busiest day at the post office, and it was Luther Burbank's catalog being mailed out. So it's hard to probably draw a direct line between those two things, but it was a huge day at the post office. We do know that when the seed catalog was going out. So let's see. Oh, here's another one popping up. We do not, this is just asking whether we have a mural. And maybe that's a question about post office. We do not have a mural in this post office. But I don't know are there lots of have you encountered post offices with incredible murals, or,
There are WPA murals. I can say that our website has more information on that. There's an online exhibit, I think maybe more than one, that talks about the murals in various parts of the country. So actually the post office I grew up with in Ames, Iowa has a mural from that time period.
Yeah. And we don't have one, but like you discussed that there's so much about the kind of pride of craftsmanship and materials. And that's very much in lots of things that we read about this building. They talk about, I mean, there were pictures of the first load of limestone that came in on the rail that was, to build whatever portion of the building, or, talked about the, Hoyt brothers and the local hardware and how they all came together and created this building. So there is a lot in the kind of craftsmanship and that angle, even if we don't have a mural, darn it.
I see in the questions a question about stamps. I know we have stamps related to California. I'm not sure about Sonoma County specifically. I wonder if there's anything about Burbank or Seeds would be my only thought, but I actually am not sure. Eric, do you know? In terms of the Sears, the question about Sears, the catalogs were sent through the mail, but when people ordered from Sears, you would send in your money, and then when items were delivered, they were delivered by express company. Because unless they were quite small, and then parcel post, you're able to deliver them. But prior to parcel post, pretty much everything would have had to have been through an express company, or like a company not necessarily connected to the post office department, because they weren't dealing in that. I have read interesting anecdotes about, obviously Sears is cutting out the middleman, but then also about local merchants also ordering from Sears. So they're getting the discounted rates and selling them. And as I was doing research for this talk, I found several articles that were very anti-mail order, and telling people to shop local, and saying, don't spend your money, you make sure, go to the local stores, don't send your money off to these bigger companies. And they weren't often named, but it's a very clear anti-mail order bias.
Oh, yeah. Don't buy from Amazon, buy from
yes, definitely parallels.
Yeah. Oh, so we have a question here about how did Santa Rosa, that might be a tough one to answer too. And the only thing that I know about that is, of course, you had the earthquake, and there were business people in Santa Rosa who wrote, as I understand it, there was a bill to have a new post office even before the earthquake struck. But I think that may perhaps added to, and I know there were letters written back to encourage the building of the post office. I don't know was it common for a place this size to get that kind of a building? I don't know.
It seemed pretty large, considering, I guess, let me think. I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that more, because by population is a couple thousand. I don't know. That's a good question. How uncommon it was. I was taking it that it was a bit unusual based on the way the newspaper was talking about it.
Yeah. And kind of interesting to know, because you made a reference to it, that we were not just the post office, we were the federal building. And in fact, I'm sitting, this is the building, I'm sitting right here right now, and that was the IRS office, and there were two IRS offices, and that I guess was the basis for saying it was a federal building and not just just a post office. So. Oh, and I had an earlier question here from a member of the museum, who, and this kind of gets to your, the discussion of delivery routes and rural routes. Now he's been looking at this from kind of maybe the opposite end here, where there in 1938 there was in Santa Rosa a movement to kind of rename streets that only had the kind of postal route numbers. And that Santa Rosa actually had kind of what was and described in the newspaper as a model effort to broaden out, and you can see that as kind of bringing people in and making them feel more, included in the community. And his question actually just gets down to apparently there's, should be, how was that done in terms of the post office and renaming, and are there records, of how that of the streets and the new names. And for the locals here, by the way, his in particular interest was in Shinate, which was renamed just off of its postal route at the time.
Would there be records?
The,
I wonder if there'd be local.
Yeah, he's having trouble finding those. I don't know if the Postal Museum has those kind of, but it probably would not have gone to that.
I don't know that we would necessarily, but the USPS has their own historian and their own archives,
Okay.
and then there's also records at the National Archives. I'd have to double check. These are all things that I would love to get into and get into these archives. I was lucky with what I was able to find online, which is sort of the theme of the pandemic, I think.
Well, let's see, what do we got here? Oh, interesting. So shipments of live things, including chicks and live bugs. Do you know anything about those kinds of things going through the mail?
Yes, I know. I think they're included with Parcel Post. I think you can still ship bees through the mail. So you can still do all of these things. I think I'm sure there's special instructions. I know we have. I think we have egg crates in our collection from the early 20th century, yes, that was certainly something that the post office was able to do, and I want to say it was with Parcel Post, helped make that possible. And probably home delivery as well.
You don't have any favorite things? I mean, you haven't dived deep into the collection yet of oddball things that have gone through the mail. I mean, because I know in our collection, we have I think this happened a lot where people, a coconut was mailed back during World War II or something along those lines. Yes.
Yes, we actually, I have looked into this, some of the interesting stuff in our collection. One of my favorite things, we have some equipment from rural free delivery drivers. We have a pair of bearskin gloves. So you can really see that they're bare. And we have sort of like these spring loaded leather pants to keep you warm as you're delivering. What else? We have some coconuts. We have a shirt cuff that someone sent from Cuba that has a bullet hole in it from a conflict down there, and they wrote on the shirt cuff and sent it as a postcard. So actually, prior to 1860, you can still send things through the mail without a wrapper, but prior to 1960, sorry, prior to 1960, there were less restrictions actually about what you could send and how you could send it. But then as things got much more mechanized in the 60s and 70s, and we get the introduction of zip codes, there's more restrictions placed on how you can mail things and what you can mail.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, let's see. We have one here. Well, let's just, maybe I'll have to tackle this one. For those of us who haven't been in the city, what is around the building today? And well, I kind of alluded to that, in the building, part of the story of this building, that we, the 1969 earthquake, which didn't do the kind of devastation to Santa Rosa. Oh, by the way, we're seismically in dangerous territory here for anyone. So this is not the best. But even though the downtown wasn't wiped out, it damaged a lot of buildings in 1969, and so it was kind of partly an impetus to do the urban redevelopment. And one of their big plans was to build a downtown mall, and that's what prompted the need to save this building. In fact, there's some great descriptions by local writers talking about how really this part of Santa Rosa, which is right off the freeway, looked like basically an empty, like a crater, and standing alone in this kind of empty kind of area was just this building alone. And then it got moved 2 blocks, over here. It's a 1,700 ton building. So they moved it over here. And yeah, so right across the street is the mall, and we're kind of just a little bit off, the downtown on 7th Street, so 3 blocks from the main drag on 4th Street. So residential behind us, the mall near us, the freeway on one side. So that's pretty much what surrounds the museum, this building at the moment. So let's see. Any other? Oh well, I didn't bring up. I tried to borrow Fred Wiseman's plane in 1911, and they said no. But I understand. Given where it is, it would be really hard. But I know along that there's a lot of technicalities, and I think it's not considered truly the first official airmail delivery, is my understanding. And I think, oh, you weren't sure about that one, right, Allison? Or you?
I had the caveat when I had from our notes when I was looking at our collections, but it was the first one requested by a postmaster, which makes me think that that's the caveat that makes it there.
Right, but it wasn't entirely sanctioned, I think, is what it comes down to. So there's some other delivery that's said to be the very first airmail delivery. But he was close.
Very close.
So. Let's see it. I think that covers. Any other last questions? Well, and when did you say the postal meeting? When are you? Do you have dates on which you're open again?
No, we're not. We're not sure. The Smithsonian is taking things slowly. I think I saw something about maybe some of the larger museums opening in May, but yeah, I don't have any specific dates. Hopefully by the fall, winter, we'll be open again.
Well, I know for us here, the museum is at least partially open again with our contemporary art space, which is open on weekends from 12 to 4, and the old post office will be open again starting May 1st, again on just weekend hours. And I think appropriate to mention here that we'll have a new lobby exhibition about the history of the building, along with our wonderful little video about the building narrated by Peter Coyote, who's a local and supporter of the museum. So we'd encourage people to come by and see that. So any last questions? I think we've kind of. Well, Allison, thank you very much. I really appreciate your presentation, and we love having guests from the Smithsonian, and wonderful to have you here. And we hope you guys get open soon too. So.
Fingers crossed. Thank you, Eric. This was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.